Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Yesterday, well, that's Tuesday the 16th of May, a secret grand jury secretly indicted BRYAN KOHBERGER. It's been making headlines all over the place. And of course, Koberger is the prime suspect in the quadruple knife slayings in Moscow, Idaho. Although one local news agency stated that no, there was not a secret trial for BRYAN KOHBERGER, well, actually, there kind of was. The grand jury thing preempted the scheduled preliminary hearing. I think it was scheduled for somewhere around the end of June. So around about this time and a couple of days next month. And but that aspect wasn't made known to the public. You know, the fact that they were going to hold a grand jury trial. And of course, a grand jury does do its work in secret. It generally does work in secret. But they don't actually decide guilt or innocence. And although I think, although grand jury trial is in secret, if you think about the JonBenet Ramsey case, people knew about a grand jury being called together. And although the details weren't really made public, we sort of did know that it was taking place, when it was taking place, while it was taking place, right? The job of a grand jury is only to decide if there's enough evidence or probable cause to move forward with a trial. In effect, it replaces, or it's an alternative to a preliminary hearing, right? Now, according to trial attorney Mo Hammoudi, and I think this is from what news agency was this? Let's just make sure. KRM.com, a local news outlet. They interviewed a trial attorney. He said the grand jury system exists in the Constitution. It's in the Fifth Amendment. It's been around since 1776. He said the strategic purpose of using a grand jury is for it to provide secrecy. And you might say, well, secrecy for what? You might say, well, because I can't answer that question, maybe something weird is going on here. Maybe there's some sort of cover-up. Maybe we need to think about it a little bit further than that. The trial attorney goes on to say the preliminary hearing would have had to have been open to the public, and the public would have had a right to be present, including the press. So what you have now is a secret proceeding which involved members of the public and the grand jurors, and they got to hear evidence. And so Idaho law requires that the prosecution prove that there's enough evidence, and this is either through, in order for there to be a trial, this is either through a preliminary hearing or a grand jury. And so guess which one that they chose. Guess which alternative they chose. And so clearly the prosecutors wish to prove their case via the former rather than the public spectacle of the latter. And there have been some conspiracy theories going on, and I want to provide some sensible and reasonable analysis to why this actually happened. I think one reason for this private, you might call it secret process, but I think a better word is private or not public, could have been because of the well-known reluctance by some of the survivors. Bear in mind, what makes this case quite unique are that there are survivors to testify within a public format, right? They were reluctant to do that. Whereas a private format without the media's knowledge would clearly have been preferable for some of the witnesses. Does that make sense? Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do. I see that around about 50 to 60% of people who view my videos aren't subscribers. If you're one of them, I have been covering this case for quite a long time. I have actually visited Moscow. I visited 1122 King Road. I visited Koberger's apartment complex. I've driven around the area. I've driven and walked around between the club that they went to, and then also the Mad Greek restaurant. So I've definitely done the rounds. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So do you remember that at least one story emerged out of the other during the past few weeks, that one of the survivors, B, refused actually to be called as a witness? She was called as a witness, or she was told that she was going to be called as a witness, I guess for the preliminary hearing, and then she said, no, I will not. And she even had a lawyer who was giving reasons for why not. And then this later was somehow resolved. Do you remember that? Well, I'm wondering if the grand jury format was how it was resolved. Do you remember this headline on April the 24th? Surviving Idaho roommate, and her name is B, fights having to testify at BRYAN KOHBERGER trial as part of his defense. Then there was another one, I think it was the next day, April 25th. Surviving roommate of Idaho murder victims doesn't want to testify at BRYAN KOHBERGER's hearing. That was obviously a reference to the preliminary hearing. And then we had this headline about a change of heart, a change of intention just 3 short days later. Surviving Idaho roommate B agrees to talk to BRYAN KOHBERGER's attorney. It's according to documents. Then another one, surviving roommate in Idaho murder agrees to speak to BRYAN KOHBERGER's attorney. Is pretty much the same thing. So what do you think led to that change? What sort of assurance? Well, I think it was, we could do this as a grand jury trial and we will have no media involved whatsoever. Okay, then I will participate. If you think about it, there's actually been a lot of news coming out of Idaho over the past few days and even weeks leading up to this bombshell. It's hard to tell whether one side has been playing some sort of game, leaking sensitive stories to the news media, or whether that has been taking place regardless. One can see that if there are uncontrolled leaks, all the more reason to get this case underway and wrapped up with a bow ASAP. And I've kind of gotten the sense that, just my personal opinion, was that the media needed to kind of back off and let them investigate and let them do their jobs. And obviously the prosecutors felt they're not backing off. And so the way we need to do this and deal with this is in the secret format. And so I think the media kind of got put in their place for being so pushy. Because if they hadn't been this pushy, maybe the preliminary hearing wouldn't have been such a big issue. So also 3 days ago, we heard from Kaylee's father, Steve. He said that he planned some sort of face-off with Kohberger, I guess, in court. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to bring it means, but if you attended the Laurie Vallow trial, I did. You know that if you or your phone makes more than so much as a peep, if you kind of try and engage with a defendant, you are out of there. You get booted out of the courtroom and you won't be allowed back in. If you so much as try and take a photo of someone, and one can imagine a similar level of strictness and discipline in this case. Now, as much as I appreciate Kaylee's father's passion and resolve and fighting on behalf of his daughter, it's going to be the court, an Idaho jury actually, that decides Kohberger's fate, nobody else. Not the court of social media, not the court of public opinion. And so in order to prevent exactly this, for a court outside of the courtroom from having any kind of say, any kind of impact, we may actually have another surprise in store for us, and that could be a change of venue. It's hard to imagine a jury pool could still be selected in the tiny town of Moscow or surrounds. And so I think what makes sense is that we may have the trial held in Boise. They've just had a high-profile case there. They know how to deal with the public, how to deal with the media, how to deal with privacy issues, and everything else. So I do think if the idea was to avoid the media, well, that may kind of have backfired, because it feels like we've just had 2 big trials that have just ended, and now the true crime machine is ready for the next one, the next trial to be slotted into the assembly line, doesn't it? And isn't that exactly where we are now? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.